Unit 11 focuses on Genesis 24 and outlines the divine plan for the continuation of the blessing of descendants via Abraham's promised son Isaac. But Isaac must have a partner, a marriage partner. And this chapter 24 beautifully outlines God's providential care through the various characters in bringing forth the next generation of those who would continue the divine promise to ultimately bless all of the nations of the earth. We passed over after last session to focus upon Genesis 22 and God's provision for the ram instead of the sacrifice of his son Isaac. God's care, providential, divine, sovereign plan to provide ultimately a way for the promise to continue. In chapter 23, which we skipped over in our outline of passages to translate, we have the story of the death of Sarah. In that day, what we call the Middle Bronze Age, the patriarchal period, the very typical plan in this region, the land of Canaan and many other parts of the Middle East, the tradition was to have a family burial cave. Well, Sarah has just recently passed, and so the negotiations are made with Ephron the Hittite, a son of Het, as he is identified, living in the area of Hebron, the land of much of Abraham's sojourn with Sarah and family. So in the area of Hebron, south of Jerusalem, he engages with Ephron to purchase this piece of land. It's a small piece of the promised land. Again, God had promised from the very beginning, the outline of the call in Genesis chapter 12, that he would make Abraham's name great. He would produce a great nation of multiple descendants, and they would be the gift of the land, through which God's plan to bless Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the nations of the earth, then and ultimately for the future of humankind. But all that he ever would own of the land is a plot of land containing a cave for which to bury his wife Sarah. Ultimately, of course, Abraham would be buried at this place that will be identified as the Cave of Machpelah. Machpelah, again, is today preserved via a monumental structure that was built originally during the time of Herod the Great. One of the things that Herod did to endear himself to the Jews of his day was to build a monument to the biblical patriarchs, their place where initially Sarah, later on Abraham, Isaac, Rebekah, and other members of the family would be buried in this cave over which was built this monument in the time of Herod. Today, it is both a mosque and a Jewish place of worship. So Islam and the Jews living somewhat tenuously side by side there at the place identified as the Cave of Machpelah. Well, now we're in Genesis 24. Genesis 24 is, again, the great plan for providing a wife for Isaac, not from among the Canaanites, not from those in the land of Abraham and Sarah's sojourn, but to come from the family heritage in the land of Aram Naharaim. Translated the Aram, sometimes it's translated Syria, but best to leave it as Aram Naharaim, and Naharaim means two rivers, the dual ending on the Hebrew Nahar, one of the terms for river or stream. Aram of the two rivers is basically a reference to the northern part of Mesopotamia in the origins of both the Tigris and Euphrates River. We earlier noted that the call of Abraham, Genesis 12, began with a family in Ur of the Chaldeans in southern Mesopotamia, and they had migrated northward to Haran, where Abraham's father Terah passed away and was buried. And then the call, Genesis 12, 1-3, would come forth while they are sojourning in Haran. This is also the region where Laban's family would be located, and also the family of Nahor, Abram's brother, who had passed away. And so, again, the relationship with the heritage, the ancestral family of Terah in the region of Upper Mesopotamia would be the place where a bride would be sought for this special divinely outlined plan through Isaac, through which the divine promise of blessing the nations would continue. Rebekah fulfills all the criteria outlined by Abraham, faithfully following the plan of God for his family, resolving the uncertainties of the servant to find this special servant woman. The story is told with illustrious detail, as again Walke points out in his commentary, that one of the, again, this is one of the longest single episodes in Genesis. The chapter, again, more than 60 verses long, as he calls it, vivid and informative. It moves along at kind of slow pace at the beginning with the dialogue between Abraham and his servant, and then moves quickly to Mesopotamia, and then slows down again in very typical Hebrew fashion in the encounter that the servant has with Rebekah there at this spring area where she has come to draw water. Again, we know in the biblical story, a place where a woman draws water is often the scene for a divinely ordained or providentially outlined plan for God's redemptive plan to continue. We have with the story of Moses, and later, ultimately, in John chapter 4, the woman at the well there in the region of Shechem and her area of Iskar, the suburb of Shechem, in John chapter 4. So the divine plan of God repeated through history. But here, Rebekah follows willingly the lead as she has been shared with by the servant, God's divine plan through Isaac, Abraham, Isaac, and of course through her would come Jacob as well as Esau. And of course that is the story for Unit 12. Encounter of Isaac, Rebekah, and the seizing of the birthright and ultimately the blessing, the family blessing from Isaac upon Jacob.